Yes. We have such a little pattern going down. Then I will hand it over to Elizabeth for our land acknowledgement.
Great. Thank you so much, Carly. So just before I jump in, this land acknowledgement was the result of a workshop that I attended last May on decolonizing the classroom through Western's Own Your Future program, where we were really encouraged to reflect on what the land meant to us and write our own land acknowledgement. So that's what I'm going to read for you today. So my name is Elizabeth Moeller, and I am a settler of this land, specifically on the land of Tiegan, a Seneca village situated in Baby Point, Toronto. I would like to acknowledge the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. I think it's important to acknowledge the land because throughout my education, I never heard the traditional names of the territories Indigenous people were talked about in the past tense, and all the struggles that they faced were in the past tense as well. It is easier to deny Indigenous people their rights if we historicize their struggles and simply pretend they don't exist. As an activist, I would like to take this opportunity to commit myself to the struggle against the systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination, work that is essential to human rights work across the world today. And today we are connecting digitally, and we need to acknowledge the ways in which technology continues to contribute to colonization. Many of us are connecting through high-speed internet, which is a basic right not afforded to many Indigenous communities. We also must recognize that although technology is an enabler, it leaves a large carbon footprint on the land we share and care for. We acknowledge all the lands that we are calling in from today. And if you'd like to learn more, you can check out native-lands.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'd also like to invite, anyone to create your own land acknowledgement. It's really like the first of a very long journey towards, truth and reconciliation, but taking the time to reflect on your positionality, whose land you're on, all very important. That's just the beginning of our journey, of course. So now it's time for an event introduction. I'm just so honored that NEADS is here with disabled student leaders across Canada as we discuss mental health, hybrid learning, self-advocacy, safe return to campus plans, and whatever else comes up along the way, honestly. This panel is a main feature of NEADS Virtual Access for All project, which is an educational awareness campaign providing resources for disabled post-secondary students on topics like transitions to post-secondary and employment, self-advocacy, accessibility, and more, all generously supported by Employment and Social Development Canada. I will let the panelists introduce themselves. I do not want to talk for the whole thing, but just a quick rundown. We have Julia Denley from the Society for Students with a Disability located at the University of Victoria, Emily Shevers from the Mohawk Students Association at Mohawk College, Cassie Pitchford from the University of New Brunswick's Diversity Within Engineering Association, and Kaylee Hodgson from the Invisible Disability Education and Advocacy Association at the University of Calgary. I was so worried about getting those caught. Okay. Quick thank you before we start to our captioner Diane, our interpreters Gilda and Isabel, our moderators Frank, Janique, and Alan, and our tech support Alan again. With that, let's start the panel. So to our panelists, just tell us a bit about yourself, the student group you're representing today, and the work you do there. Why don't we start with Cassie?
Sure. Thanks so much, Carly, and thank you very much to everyone for having me here today. My name is Cassie. I'm a mechanical engineering student at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, and I'm the current president of UNB's Diversity Within Engineering Society. I have a really unique university journey as I started to lose my hearing after I started university. And that has really opened my eyes to the cracks students with disabilities are falling through, not just at UNB, but at engineering schools nationally. And after kind of becoming acclimatized to my disability, I started standing up to the discrimination and the inequities I faced and my colleagues faced. And so that's really motivated me to making procedural changes and just cultural changes at the local, regional, and national levels. That's really fueled my work with diversity within engineering. We used to be Women in Engineering, but we amalgamated with Genderqueers in 2018 and became Diversity Within Engineering. Since then, we work to fill the gaps and represent diverse students, so BIPOC students, students with disabilities, women in engineering, to really give them a place where they feel safe and where they can belong. We put on inclusive events for our students. We do social media advocacy. We do encourage self-advocacy. And we also do a lot of outreach to female identifying engineering, female identifying students in middle and high schools interested in STEM fields. Thanks.
Awesome. And it's really cool. We actually met Cassie when they reached out to NEADS so that we could help advocate and sign a letter of support, because they were building an accessible, well, working towards an accessible testing lab at UNB. So that's how we met Cassie. So it's really great to have you on a panel with us. I will throw it over to Emily now.
Oh, we're gonna have the unmuting trouble, obviously. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily, and I was born with a condition that caused me to be legally blind. So kind of opposed to Cassie, I've had a very long education journey with my disability. I am in my second and final year at Mohawk College, and just about a year ago, I started working on the board of directors for the Mohawk Students Association. And I was actually the first person with a visual impairment to sit on their board of directors. So the Mohawk Students Association, that I'm now going to refer to as the MSA because it's shorter and less wordy, is a nonprofit organization within the college that is built for and led by college students. We are a separate entity from the college, but work collaboratively to support students, empower students, and build a community that can support them with positive experiences, supports, and really just be a listening ear as well as a student voice for them. We've really worked to close equity gaps since before the pandemic and ensure that we're providing equitable, inclusive, and diverse services, programming, and experiences for students. We're really able to achieve this by understanding the students that we serve, which we've done through surveys, focus groups, empowering students to co-create and co-facilitate events that are geared towards equity inclusion. So things like running an ASL workshop within our for our students. And one of the ways that we've also implemented this is including an accommodations box on our event registration forms to allow students to fully participate and have access to what they need. When it comes to also implementing activities and experiences that are equitable for students, we use an equity sequence model, which all of our staff have been trained on. And it really focuses on creating, promoting, posting, and delivering any material that is accessible and meets current AODA standards. And then finally, I'd like to give a little shout out to my colleague Mel, who helped me put together some of today's content and help brainstorm. Accessibility and innovation are a collective effort after all. So thanks.
Awesome. Love it. Credit where credit is due. Always great. And yeah, I personally like advocacy and buy-in for representation. I mean, it benefits everyone, not just students with disabilities. So it's great to see you bring that into like a wider student association. And then I will throw it over to Kaylee.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kaylee Hodgson. I'm a fourth year student in the Community Rehabilitation Disability Studies program at the University of Calgary. I'm about to graduate if all goes according to plan, and yesterday I actually just got accepted into the Master of Public Policy program at U of C, so I'm very, very excited about that. I personally deal with mental illness and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so I understand what it's like to face stigma for a condition that isn't immediately visible. That's why I created the Invisible Disability Education and Advocacy Society, IDEA for short, because that is definitely a mouthful. There were no other student groups at U of C that really recognized invisible disabilities as a whole, and I think that invisibility is a dimension that can really complicate a person's experience with their disability and with ableism. At the IDEA, we currently focus on educating people about different types of invisible disabilities. So for example, next week I'm running an info session on depressive and bipolar disorders, and we've also covered Lyme disease and encephalitis and all kinds of other diagnoses. One thing we really make sure to do is center the voices of disabled people in our club. So that's maybe through guest speakers or content created by disabled people, or we do try to fundraise for organizations that include people with lived experience in their governance. It is tricky because we are just a new organization. We just started like pretty much in the middle of the pandemic, September 2020. So we don't have a ton of funding, we don't have a ton of support yet, but we're getting rolling and we're trying to do good work.
I think you are doing excellent work. I personally have an invisible disability myself, psoriatic arthritis, a few other things on that, let's be real. So I saw IDEA and I'm like, oh my God, they have to be at this panel, and you are, and it is truly a dream come true. Now throwing it over to Julia Denley. We are so excited to finally have them at a panel. I will pass you the mic now.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Yes, so I just also want to briefly acknowledge that I'm on the territory of the Lekwungen peoples, and also the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So yeah, I'm Julia, my pronouns are she and her. I am a biology student in about the third year of my program, though I've been at UVic for longer, on and off, as I've struggled with health problems and delayed diagnosis, which have really impacted my studies and taught me a lot about accessibility in the process. I live with a spinal CSF leak, craniocervical junction instability, ME/CFS, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, along with its common comorbidities, and I'm also neurodivergent. My passion for advocacy and activism and my lived experience as a disabled student are what led me to disability advocacy, first by starting a mental health club at UVic, and more recently with the Society for Students with a Disability. I joined the SSD board, I guess, 3.5 years ago, first as a general member at large, then student liaison, and now I'm one of the co-chairs. I also co-lead an SSD campaign known as Access for All, which advocates for equitable access to education through the continued implementation of online learning options that were introduced during the earlier stages of the pandemic. So the SSD is a post-secondary student advocacy group under the University of Victoria Students' Union, which promotes the full participation and inclusion of UVic students who self-identify as having one or more disabilities. We support students to reduce barriers in the social, emotional, and educational domains of student life. Our programs and services include a food security program, a weekly games night for some social connection and building community, a drop-in online group study, drop-in hours in our physical space on campus, a mental health support group known as the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, art therapy, and various one-off workshops and events. We also offer a couple of funding support programs to help with either accessing the Learning Assistance Program at UVic and also for things like mobility devices, assistive technology, that sort of thing. And we also have an active community over on Discord. The other main thing we do is advocacy work. So ranging from our main advocacy campaign, also called Access for All, to individual level advocacy for students who aren't getting their accessibility and accommodation needs met. The Center for Accessible Learning at our university organizes accommodations, but unfortunately does little to help students who face resistance from their professors when it comes to implementation of those accommodations. So we try to address this gap by offering support to affected students, as well as by advocating for relevant policy change. I and 3 other SFC members sit on the UVic community that's currently revising the university's accessibility and accommodations policy. So yeah, that's the SFC.
I saw so many head nods when you said that like your on-campus service provider was not doing their job. That's relatable content. Also, SSD was one of the first disabled student groups I ever like saw, and that I was like, oh, those exist as I was becoming disabled. It was just so cool. So it's so cool to have that working relationship with SSD. Second question, so excited. How has the pandemic exacerbated student mental health concerns, and how can we collectively improve to better address those impacts? And I will hand it off to Kaylee first for this round.
Yeah, for sure. So I did a bit of an informal survey within people, that I know and within my degree program. And a lot of people said that if they had pre-existing social anxiety, the pandemic really made it worse. There's a bit of an uptick in agoraphobia. A lot of people were finding that if they had germophobic related OCD, that the hand washing messages were really kind of feeding into those compulsions. So they faced some issues there. I get that it happens. A lot of people are also finding that it's been really difficult to engage in their regular coping mechanisms. So for a lot of us, maybe that's exercise and all the gyms were shut down. A lot of us can't see our friends. We can't go out and like get a bit of fresh air. That's been really challenging for a lot of us. A lot of people also mentioned that they've been having huge difficulties concentrating in class, whether, to increased workloads that's causing them to be stressed out, or because they're learning from home where the environment's very different. Some people are also concerned about their physical health because they're getting less passive exercise, just getting from point A to point B on campus. I myself really noticed that I've had to kind of step up my own self-motivated exercise, which is very challenging. A lot of people also don't feel like they have any support from their instructors, which is really, really demoralizing. There's accessibility concerns that aren't being met. That's something that's pretty familiar to all of us, I bet. There's very much a lack of communication. If we're in a class with multiple professors, but it's the same class, there's really communication breakdown between the professors, which is also impacting our learning. That's making things pretty challenging. And a lot of us are feeling like the instructors forget that we're human people on this side of the Zoom screen. We're not just little academic robots. There's very much a lack of concern for our personal events or if we have any medical things ongoing. So there's just a multitude of factors that existed before, but now they're really being thrown into sharp relief.
Yeah, that is really illuminating. I mean, across the board, and even before COVID, the mental health situation was god awful. And yeah, I see those faces of agreement. Yep. Yeah, we got a lot of work to do on advocacy and pressure and lobbying, but I mean, you guys are all fantastic, so I don't have worries about our future, really. So I will now hand it off to Julia.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think there are quite a few factors that have impacted student mental health during the pandemic, and also not only in negative ways. I think it's been kind of mixed. So in the earlier stages of the pandemic, I think a lot of students were stuck at home in living situations that were pretty riddled with distractions and not as conducive to remote learning. So that definitely made the abrupt switch to online classes even more stressful. Lots of people moved home and then lost the social support and community that they'd built at university. And some people living with mental illness definitely found that being isolated at home really exacerbated their symptoms. And then, as Kaylee mentioned, the increase in agoraphobia and that sort of thing. I also think many universities, or probably all of them, have mental health care supports that don't really meet the needs of their student community or aren't sufficient. And with a big increase in mental health concerns during the pandemic, I think those systems of support became even more strained. But I do want to mention one positive impact, which is that for folks who struggle with accessing services in person, at least at my university, mental health supports like counseling and seeing a doctor became available online, which really benefited some folks, though I know it also didn't work for other people. And similarly, while online learning isn't a good option for some students, others really benefited from having that online course access and found that their mental health improved. So some students found classroom environments really distracting and were able to focus better at home. And some people experienced reduced stress just from the flexibility afforded by online courses. This is especially true for students balancing multiple commitments like work or caregiving responsibilities on top of school. And I think the best way to address mental health impacts moving forward is to take what we've learned and offer classes and mental health supports both online and in person. Similarly, students should have both online and in-person opportunities to build a social community. I know it's been really helpful for a lot of the students in our community to have our Discord community online. And even though a lot of people are back in person, it's still really active. I think it's also important to educate faculty about student mental health concerns and disability in general, so they can offer more flexibility and understanding for students who need it, as well as appropriate accommodations, and without being resistant to implementing those accommodations. And ultimately, I think we just really need to advocate for better mental health care, both at our universities and in our provinces. I think there's been a big shift in the past, probably 5 to 10 years with mental health awareness, but we still don't really have adequate and affordable services for people who need that professional help.
Absolutely. Just echoing that. I mean, we've come a long way, but there's still a very long way to go. And then I will now hand it over to Emily.
I feel like I really resonated with literally everything that has been said already, and I totally agree with all of it. I was just heading into post-secondary at the beginning of the pandemic, so I can't exactly speak to post-secondary student mental health beforehand, but Even still, when I was coming into post-secondary, I moved away from home to school and I moved into residence where I did not have a roommate and was basically completely alone and even more isolated than I would have been at home. And then this year I moved into a house with roommates that I had never met. So very, very unconventional. And a lot of this has led to feeling a lot of disconnect from my fellow students, which has led to my own mental health concerns, just like everybody else, that I know a lot of other students have had similar experiences. It's been so hard to connect with people, just in general, and especially as someone with a disability, I really found that I relied on those face-to-face interactions to feel connected to other students. Because it just offers a different kind of connection and different information that you don't get through a screen. You have the opportunity to give cell phone numbers or connect with them other than just seeing their little box with their name. Like now we're at the point where people don't even feel obligated to turn cameras on, and I get it. Zoom fatigue is so real. Turning on your camera has like 10 times more energy than just laying in bed with your computer. I've done it. And in terms of the MSA, pre-pandemic, we had actually implemented a mental health service called Empower Me that was student geared and free of charge. So it included things like one-to-one counseling, coaching, group therapies, and really utilized a multitude of mental health techniques and therapies that met the unique needs of students, like people who knew what students were going through, knew what these struggles were. And it really became a big focus as we moved into a pandemic where everything was uncertain and it caused a lot of stress for people. We've also acknowledged the current struggles of students and continuously try to work to support student mental health. We've tried to give students a voice in their opinions, ideas, and concerns. For example, we have a student wellness representative committee that I led this year. And just yesterday, we were giving out wellness bags to students, and seeing the smiles on their face when they got this little bag of goodies with things like coloring books and stress balls, like you could tell that it was something that was needed. And then even running, like yesterday, we had a journaling workshop and sharing self-care tactics with students that they can take advantage of and be beneficial. I know even I've appreciated a little reminder that like, hey, you need to drink some more water. I'm totally guilty of not doing enough of that. And then during the pandemic, we also provided our staff with mental health first aid training to better support students in crisis and better students through issues like burnout, not Zoom fatigue, and return to campus anxiety. And we really hope that we can take these techniques that we've been forced to implement because it's such a big issue, and really use them and have them assist us in creating safe spaces post-pandemic and giving students a place where they feel safe and a place where they feel heard and valued. Their concerns are valid.
Yeah, I mean, has the pandemic been terrible? Yes, clearly, undoubtedly. But like you said, it forced us to implement a lot of new ways of coping with mental health. I don't know if net wise it's a positive gain or loss, but definitely a bright side on that. And then I will hand it over to Cassie.
I've just been nodding so much this whole time because I agree with everything that's been said, and I feel it so much in my soul. In terms of here at UNB, it just seems like everybody's capacities to just be themselves is less. It's less for student leaders, it's less for the instructors, and it's less for the students as well. And it's been a big question of how do we support that? What can we put in to support it? And at UNB, our student union implemented a service added on to their undergraduate insurance where you're able to request a counselor and be matched with them with about a week, which has been really good. And it's free, unlimited counseling, which is really helpful and good for students. But I also find that the university is not talking to us very much. They're not asking us where the shortfalls are. Things are just happening to us. They're giving things to us without asking us if we want it, if it works for us, and how it impacts us as a whole. So I'd really like to see the concept of nothing for us without us embodied some more at the administrative level. Because I think coming out of this pandemic, we've talked a lot about what didn't work for people and what people didn't like in the shortfalls, but we also need to recognize and acknowledge things that were helpful to students during the pandemic. The flexibility of hybrid learning for some students is amazing. So I think it's also just as important to support our mental health coming out of this, but also looking at how students were benefited during the pandemic. So those things don't necessarily have to go away as we transition back to a new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm from Ottawa, so we know a thing or two about our administration not listening to us. Sure hope they don't see this video. I'm kidding. Anyways, next question. You're all fantastic. So how has your school and student group adapted to hybrid learning, and how have return to campus plans accommodated disabled students or excluded them? Let's be real. And I will hand it over to Julia for this.
Thanks, Carly. Yeah, my answer here is not going to sound super positive because I don't think UVic has done a great job here. So hybrid learning is something we're actually still advocating for at UVic rather than something we currently have. We have slightly more online courses than we did pre-pandemic, but otherwise things have mostly gone back to in-person learning, and then students who need those hybrid options are struggling a lot. Some professors are letting students attend remotely on like a case-by-case basis or sometimes as an overall class policy, but this information isn't actually made available when folks register for classes. So students who need remote attendance options are generally left scrambling at the beginning of the semester as they find out whether or not their professors are willing to record lectures. The university did invest in recording technology in over 100 classrooms, but there really isn't a clear expectation for profs to utilize this, and many of them just don't bother or have objections like privacy concerns. And people have had to take a semester off as they're uncomfortable being in crowded, poorly ventilated classrooms during a time when the predominant COVID variant is so easily transmissible. Yeah, so I'd say UVic is doing a pretty poor job of accommodating disabled students as we return to campus. There could have been significantly greater efforts to educate faculty about why accommodations such as remote attendance are so important for disabled students, especially immunocompromised students. If UVic really wanted equitable access to its courses, then it would have strongly encouraged, if not mandated, recording of lectures. And as it stands, some people are going to class sick as they're afraid of the academic impact of missing classes when those classes aren't recorded. So it's not a great situation, and I'm definitely still advocating for us to have hybrid class access.
Wow, it's the more I learn about other situations at other schools, it just keeps getting worse. And I mean, absolutely no shame. If you want to give a negative take, give it, be as open, honest as you want. Don't hold back, because we're here for us. We're here for the disabled community. We're not here for our admin or maybe our teachers a little. I don't know if they want to be involved. Anyways, I'm going to hand it off to Cassie now.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to retweet everything Julia has said. I relate to it a lot because during the pandemic, our professors needed a lot more support from our Student Accessibility Center to make sure that students had the accommodations they needed in order to succeed. But it really felt like the pandemic year last year where we were all online at UNB. They took a very hands-off approach, and it really let down a lot of students, and it's really frustrating. As a group for DWE, our biggest point we've made since coming back in person is when students are coming to us with problems or with issues and they don't know where to turn, they come to us and we kind of help them carve out a solution. I think the hybrid learning, so at UNB, there were a lot of academic integrity issues last year because we were online and the profs cranked up the heat because we had full access to texts and everything. But in my opinion, they cranked up the heat too much, and that drove a lot of students to feel like their only option was to cheat to pass. And so I feel like that's kind of being used as an excuse to not have as much access to virtual and hybrid learning as there should be. Because here students are also coming to class sick because the prof doesn't want to go through the hassle of having a hybrid classroom. And so it's just letting students down on a lot of levels. And I would just I would really encourage any university, especially mine, to kind of have a comprehensive questionnaire to students to see what they need. They're not asking us what we need. They're telling us what they think we need. And that's the problem. That's what's making the gap between disabled students and their instructors this big. They're supposed to be making it this big.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so baffling and also expected. Like, why are we moving in the wrong direction? You think they'd learn by now. But of course, you know, as disabled people, are we really shocked? It's a lot of feelings to sort through. So I am going to hand it over to Kaylee.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with everything that's already been said. I have the unique position of being in a community rehabilitation and disability studies program. And you would think that, you know, they'd have a little bit more empathy for what disabled students are going through, but it's really not good. In some cases, it is worse than classes in other programs and other faculties, which is just, it's fascinating. Like, we learn about accessible education and then they turn around and tell us we have an hour to get this done, and then they don't communicate with us. So that's been just like fascinating. There's not a lot of understanding from the university staff as a whole. Like, you go to your professor, you tell them that you need something, and then they say, well, no, I can't do that because you don't have a letter from Student Accessibility Services, which you need to have like months in advance. It's not a very reactive understanding of student needs. It's very, very much, this is what I'm going to do, and you're either going to like it or you're going to fail out, which is very much not in the spirit of inclusivity. I've had a couple of people tell me that they've been really struggling with this return to campus because I live in Alberta and we just returned to classes on Monday and everyone is on campus. And there are so many people that are struggling because they're experiencing difficulties with long COVID on top of any pre-existing issues. And there seems to be no understanding for the fact that the COVID pandemic is truly a mass disabling event. There's no understanding for changing medical needs. You know, if anybody's has a family emergency, or, you know, they need to be a caregiver for someone in their family who has COVID, let alone any pre-existing or new disabilities outside of the realm of COVID. And there's very little accessibility for students who would like their lectures recorded as well. That's definitely a huge issue that we face at the University of Calgary. A lot of professors will claim technological incompetence to not record lectures or say that they don't have to, it's their intellectual property, when that is something that Student Accessibility Services has said out loud that they should be making available to their students if the need arises. So there's a lot of excuses being made. There's a lack of communication. There have been a couple of surveys sent out for us to advocate for our needs, but seeing as we all just returned to campus on Monday, that seems to have been either just for show. So it's definitely been a bit of an interesting situation, and there's not a lot of positive progress for disabled students going on.
Yeah, no, really. And it's strange when programs are designed to help communities and then fail the people of the communities you're supposed to help when they take the courses. It's very strange. And I like to echo that COVID is a mass disabling event. I've always said you can become disabled at any time. And this is really showing how this applies to everyone. And I will throw it over to Emily now.
I'll bring us back to a little bit more positive. So my college actually takes a more conservative approach to the health measures and has yet to to announce a return to campus plan. We're still like 90% online, but we do know that it will include a slow reintegration that will be more prevalent probably in the fall. However, the MSA, while not an academic association, is starting to serve its students through hybrid programming. We are having some leeway with getting back on campus, and we are ensuring that what we are doing is safe while creating a space that enables and empowers more students to be actively and equitably participating in events. So we really make a conscious effort to include accessibility in our plans as opposed to an afterthought that requires student accommodations. So we actually just back in the fall before Omicron, were able to host some events that allowed both an in-person and a virtual option. One of my favorites was we did charcuterie boards, and you had the option to either do it over Zoom at your home where we sent you the materials, or to come to campus, get the materials and do it with people. And I've really enjoyed this, and it works for so many people. It is something that benefits all. If you need to stay home with your kids, if you need to get out and you want to connect with people and you're like, I need to go to campus because I've sat at my computer all day, and doing it in spaces that obviously meet all of the accommodation requirements. And like I said, using that accommodation box on forums to kind of support students in this. And I really do hope that the college as well takes a similar approach when we are making our return to campus plans. Personally, I would really like to see the college engage, like you've all kind of been saying, engage in personal conversations with groups like Accessible Learning Services, disabled students, people with lived experience, to gain a full picture of what best supports students with disabilities, and not even just students with disabilities, literally all students, like we said, whether it's mental health, disabilities, every student right now I feel like is struggling with something, and hybrid learning is the best model to support that in a return to campus plan. I literally wrote it down again because I think it's so important. Return to campus plans really best accommodate disabled students by answering questions like what supports all students, not just students with disabilities. What can we do that supports all students? And the answer is that hybrid learning, which I hope can be seen. I'm so sorry to hear the unfortunate experiences that it's not going well for other groups. But overall, as a students association, we are continuing to make significant efforts to continue accessibility in our post-pandemic events, programming, and services, because we do see that it has value and that it is important. And we continue to advocate for students in that sense to the college to say this is what needs to happen going forward, and cross our fingers it's what does.
We did not plan this, but that ties in so perfectly with our next question. Our brain is like merged now. All right. Okay. So how has hybrid learning benefited disabled students, and what should we keep if we move to in-person learning, if at all? And I will start with Cassie for this question.
Sure, thanks. So I think a lot has benefited disabled students with with learning online. So for example, like I've talked to friends with Crohn's disease who loved online school because if he was having a bad day, he didn't have to put on a brave face for people. He could just keep his camera off, have a hot water bottle with him, and just do class, right? He couldn't do that if he was in a live classroom. Too many people would look at him weirdly. Having things recorded, so like students with cognitive disabilities can re-watch, so they can have full access to everything. That has been key to even students who don't have disabilities, helping them relearn. If you have an appointment, your class is recorded. We all know specialists, you can't really pick and choose when you go. You're at their mercy, not the other way around. So if you have to miss a class, you can watch the recording, and it's great because then you don't miss out on anything. You don't experience gaps in the learning from that day by looking at somebody's notes because it's just all there. Other things that benefit students with disabilities is our profs actually, in my experience, have been really good in talking to us. They have been flexible. If a bunch of students are requesting a due date to be shifted, they'll shift it. I really do think the downfalls at UMB come from more of the administrative side than the professors, because I think at UMB, the biggest thing is the instructors are not getting the tools and the supports they need to make an inclusive and safe classroom environment for everybody.
I feel like that's something I forget a lot. I'll be like, yeah, this prof is being mean. And I'm like, this prof also has not received adequate training or support in this. Anyways, I'll throw it over to Emily now.
Thanks. So now I get to repeat what I just said, in that I truly believe it is in the best interest of post-secondary institutions to continue with the online classes while offering in person, like whether that be things are recorded or asking disabled students what works and what should be implemented. But I do think that they should continue because they do remove those traditional educational barriers that have prevented a wide variety of students with and without disabilities from engaging and participating in education successfully. So I know personally for myself, a lot of my accommodations used to revolve around having access to technology and electronic documentation. And I struggled a lot with it because it was consistently having to ask the teachers, can I get the PowerPoint slides? Can you send me this electronically? Like, a piece of paper is not going to work for me. And since being online, these barriers have essentially been eliminated. I really haven't had to use my accommodation letter so often, and it has really removed a lot of those barriers. And essentially my version of Accessible has become somewhat of the standard. Of course, I do miss being engaged and I enjoy in-person learning face-to-face. And I really feel like a hybrid system accommodates both. Give that in-person face-to-face where you get the opportunity to connect, engage. Some people focus better on that, but offer a recorded version, offer a place like My Canvas or any other online learning platforms where all of the notes are accessible to all of the students and you're still able to submit assignments online. And it's really my dream education system. Like having online content, reading and videos with a face-to-face lecture, which so much of virtual learning has made these ideas possible. We've come up with these new ideas. It's so how can we incorporate them together? And the pandemic has created such a large shift of focus on technology, which has empowered students to seek education that they wouldn't have access to previously. Students from around the world are coming to study at colleges and universities with Canada. Like, I was doing some group work and the student was like, yeah, it's like 2 a.m. here. And, but they were able to still stay with their family and have access to that education. It would honestly be unethical to remove these options as we think about return, because it's just inequitable and inaccessible, and we need to take our learnings from the last 2 years and really implement them to fit all of our students' needs.
I completely agree. And I never even thought about it as an ethics concern, but I totally agree. It would be completely unethical to reverse all the progress we've made so far. So thank you for that. And I'm going to throw it over to Kaylee.
Yeah, so I 100% echo everything that's been said so far. There have been a lot of advancements throughout this online and hybrid learning. A lot more people are able to access the school materials. I've personally found the implementation of captions on lecture videos and the ability to just change the speed of the lecture videos. That's been phenomenal. Going back to rewatch something that I didn't quite hear the first time, being able to just do it at my own pace, I found that very helpful. I know so many people have also found that extremely helpful. I've also heard a lot of people saying how it's helping them to have a familiar environment to take their test in. You don't have to worry about commuting all the way across campus to your test and getting there on time and figuring out anything else. And people have all of their aids nearby. Like, every day I study with the heat pack on my back. That's been a total game changer, but I wouldn't be able to do that in person. So I definitely understand that kind of thing. There's also been less time commuting for a lot of us because the University of Calgary is primarily a commuter school. Not a ton of people live on campus. So a lot of us have been finding that the lack of commute time helps us kind of take care of ourselves a little bit better. We can get a bit more sleep. We can actually eat real food during the day. That's been an absolute game changer. The self-care, the ability of us to engage in self-care has been way better. Our program implemented a stress buster for some courses where you're allowed a one-time 24-hour extension. No questions asked, but it is one time per course, only in certain courses and only for 24 hours. I would like to see more of that going forward. I think it's really a step in the right direction for sure. It's definitely something new. And we're allowed a 24-hour window for all of our tests and quizzes. That's the current standard for every online course. That has been so helpful for so many people. If they're in the course internationally, they can do it in, their awake time and not in the middle of the night. A lot of us, we all have different times of the day where we're a bit more functional at, or if we have appointments or anything, again, we're at the whim of our specialists. So it's kind of nice being able to kind of mitigate that a little bit instead of worrying about making something up. It's nice just to be able to kind of pick and choose the time where you're going to be at your best and you are going to be able to represent your knowledge properly. So there's a lot of this that I would really like to see continuing moving forward, but we've had a lot of budget cuts for post-secondary in our province, so my hopes aren't super high, but I'm really hoping that groups like mine and other accessibility groups will be able to advocate to keep a lot of this going forward.
As you were talking, I realized how weird it is that we're so accustomed to being like used to an older version of school where we didn't have time to eat full meals. What? Anyway, just a little reflection there. I will throw it over to Julia now.
Yeah, I relate to so much of what's been said. And also, Kaylee, like for me, it's an ice pack on the back of my head. Like, can't do that on campus, but again, like game changer for me. But yeah, so I think online attendance options as part of a hybrid or high flex course delivery model have been a huge boon for me and for so many other disabled students I've spoken with. So for some examples, students with chronic pain and chronic fatigue often really appreciate being able to attend class from their own home or even their own bed without having to sacrifice limited energy or exacerbate pain by going to campus and sitting in a classroom. Some neurodiverse students can focus a lot better when attending remotely, especially if they benefit from stimming in ways that are discouraged in a classroom, like if they're distracting to other students. Let's say I know some neurodiverse folks who really prefer to pace around their room while they're listening to lectures, but in a classroom, that would probably be too distracting to other folks. Immunocompromised students shouldn't have to risk their health being in a classroom during a pandemic. And many immunocompromised people will also tell you that even outside of a pandemic, flu season is a really significant concern. So remote attendance can really help people engage with course material without risk of infection. And then for the students who really do benefit from in-person learning, there's more room to socially distance in classrooms if other students are attending remotely. And I think too, like part of what I've tried to mention in advocating at my university is if they have some people attending remotely, they can also enroll more people in the class, which unfortunately so much of what universities pay attention to is just their bottom line, right? So it's financially, it makes sense to them. And yeah. So also chronically ill students often can't predict when their symptoms are going to flare up. So being able to listen to a recorded lecture when they're feeling up for it affords a lot more flexibility. And then, as has been mentioned, balancing medical appointments and procedures around school is way easier if you have asynchronous lecture access. And even for folks who can attend in person, reviewing recorded lectures can be super beneficial just from a pedagogical perspective. So I hope recorded lectures become the norm in all universities, but I think we'll need to advocate to make that happen. And I've answered this question in fairly general terms so far from what I've heard from talking to other students, but also just to answer it briefly from a more personal perspective. So earlier in my university experience, I could sometimes still make it to in-person classes, but with a lot of difficulty and only some of the time. So my attendance would be super sporadic as I was battling undiagnosed health issues, and many days I'd just be too sick to make it to campus. And then on the days I did get to campus, I'd not only flare up my health issues, but by the time I would get to a classroom, I wouldn't be able to focus anyway because my chronic pain would be so bad. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a spinal CSF leak and craniocervical instability. So these conditions cause really severe pain, dizziness, brain fog that are way worse when I'm upright. And also when I'm not on camera right now, I'm at this point, I'm stuck flat in bed most of the time. So I caused a lot of further damage to my health by trying to force myself to sit in class for years. And recorded lectures just like weren't available until the pandemic. And once classes went online, it was amazing. Like I realized that previously the majority of the energy I expended for school went towards managing my symptoms in an inaccessible environment and trying to like chase down notes or figure out how to catch up without it all being available right there online. And so it was amazing being able to access lectures from home, and I really started to enjoy school a lot more again. And now this has been taken away, so my university has reverted almost entirely to in-person learning, and it's been super disheartening. And I think this is why hybrid or high flex learning makes so much sense, because I know many students benefit greatly from in-person learning, and I'd never want to take that away just so I can thrive in an online environment. But letting people participate online or in person based on their individual access needs would create a far more equitable educational environment. So I'm going to continue to advocate for this until it becomes a reality. The flexibility of hybrid learning benefits not only disabled students, but international students, students who work outside of school, and students with caregiving responsibilities. It just makes a lot of sense.
Thank you so much for that. And I think a lot of us, like before the pandemic, we were like, hey, can I just get these presentations shared or recording the lecture? And they told us it was impossible. And then COVID hits and they're like, guess what we're all doing now? I'm happy it happened. I'll still be petty about it. It's 12:54, but you know what? Oh, well, speed round. Are we ready for a speed round? I didn't tell the panelists about this. This is an actual unexpected speed round. Okay, how can disabled students best advocate for personal and collective accessibility and accommodations issues at their schools? One sentence, starting with Kaylee. Go.
Student accessibility services is more for the sake of paperwork than for your needs. So you need to contact your student representatives. We've had very good student union presidents. You need to speak up. You need to align with each other, and we need to have each other's backs as we go through this.
Incredible. Julia, go.
So I might be more than one sentence, but I'll be brief. So I think strength in numbers is a big thing here. So I think trying to partner up with other disabled student activists and allies makes advocacy work a lot more manageable. And also just like persistence. I think when you're advocating for meaningful change, you'll face a lot of challenges and roadblocks for university administrators trying to placate you rather than actually respond to what you're asking for. So just persist.
I'm having way too much fun with this. Emily, go.
I definitely have to say things like the board of directors for students associations, whose job it is to advocate for students. But honestly, one of the best ways that you can advocate for accessibility and equity is to show that it's beneficial for not just students with disabilities, but for literally everyone.
Okay, Cassie, take us home. Go.
Sure. So speak up if you're being discriminated against. Speak up to your student leaders, because we will stand with you and we will fight for you. Get data if you can, because it's easy to ignore one person, but it's a lot more difficult to ignore the statistic of 10% of people are forfeiting their testing accommodations because the regime is not accessible to them. And then sprinkle in personal testimony, because at the end of the day, we are advocating because humans are hurting. And that needs to be humanized. It needs to be remembered for the people advocating and the people you're advocating to. And never give up, because you know what's right.
How on the spot? Guys, that's terrifying how incredible you all are. And now I'm just going to go into like shameless need promos, like all soulless and whatnot. God, okay, well, first off, thank you so much to absolutely everyone involved, our incredible panelists. I'm gonna hide self-view. This is terrible. I just looked at myself. Okay, but thank you so much to our panelists, our fantastic tech team working behind the scenes, and to our audience for sharing your Friday lunch hour with us. Before we go, a few quick needs updates. They're actually good. Please don't leave. We're launching our spring events lineup, which is really exciting. In April, we're having events on mentorship, virtual accessibility, and our NEADS Student Awards program. Definitely worth keeping an eye out for those. We will also be putting out a general call for panelists in the future if you want to speak on a panel yourself, as these lovely people above me on my screen, probably not yours, have done. Keep an eye out on our newsletter for that. Both our National Student Awards program and Accessibility Resilience program are currently accepting applications. NEADS is dedicated to addressing the disproportionate barriers disabled students face to learning, so we encourage absolutely everyone eligible to apply. I'm going to put this in the chat. I thought I could do that faster. All right, links in chat to applications. Definitely, again, encourage everyone to apply. Finally, make sure to follow us on all our social media and subscribe to our newsletter to be the first to know about upcoming events, projects, resources, you name it. And finally, it's almost over. We will be emailing you a link to a recording of this event once it is uploaded on our YouTube page. This did have dual language interpretation, so there's going to be a delay, but one day it will be in your inbox. And with that, we can stop recording. What?